Hello students, this video will take you through the various steps you need to follow in order to analyse a source. And we'll be doing three things when we analyse the source. We'll be firstly identifying certain features, analysing certain features, and then evaluating certain features or evaluating the source itself to see whether or how useful it is in order to understand the time period that we're studying. So this source here, if you have a very close look at it, we'll look at the source first before we go into actually answering any questions about it. The source itself is of a Japanese samurai, as you can see, and he's wearing a suit of armor, he's carrying various weapons, and at the back here, this red cloak is what is called a horo, and you can see in the caption down here the title actually says samurai wearing a horo. So this painting, which is actually a wood block print, is entitled Samurai Wearing a Horo, and that red cloak there is the horo. The creator, the artist who did this painting is Otogawa Kuniyoshi, and he lived between 1798 and 1861, and I found this painting / wood block print from the internet, from Wikimedia, Wikicommons, and that's the URL there. So when we analyse a source, the thing we have to look at first is the most significant feature or features of the source, and they're the things that we need to focus upon in our answers. Now, for this source, it's pretty easy. The samurai himself, that he is the most significant feature of this source. And then we've got various things. We've got his weapons and things like that, but the samurai itself, that's the most significant feature. So we have to talk about him, and then we go on to everything else that he might be wearing. There's a lot of writing in the background of this woodblock print. You can see there's no actual translations of this writing, so for the purposes of answering any questions that you may get about this source, you don't have to actually refer to what is said in the writing here, because unless you know Japanese, you will not know what is said. Sometimes in the caption below, there's actually a translation of writing from a foreign language. It's translated into English down below. If that is the case, then you can look at the translation and use that in your answers. But for this one, we don't have any translations, so we don't really need to comment upon the writing itself. So in order to understand who this samurai was, when he lived and so forth, we need to have a look at the weapons he's wearing, the horo itself, and his armor, and hopefully that gives us an indication about the nature of this individual and the time period in which he lived. So let's have a look at these questions now. So the first question here is an identification. Well, there's three questions which ask you to identify features of the image here. And identification is to indicate who or what someone is. So this is the easiest skill to master in analysing a source, identifying key features. And your responses can just take the form of dot points pretty much. So the first question here is, when was this source created? Now, as I said before, I cannot read Japanese, so I don't find the information here. But if I look in the caption, I can see that we've got the title of the work, the creator of the work, and then when he lived. So logically, Otogawa Kuniyoshi, he lived from 1798 to 1861, so that's when he created this source. So that would be our answer. So I go here, and I've already put the answer in there, and there it is. So that's my answer to the first question. The second question, another basic question, who created this source? And once again, I go up to the caption here, and the information's there. Otogawa Kuniyoshi. the information is given to us. So I go in. Oh. And I put my answer there. And then the third question is, who is the person in the image? And if I didn't know just from the appearance of this individual that he was a samurai, then I could look down at the title of the work, and there is the clue there: samurai wearing a horo. So he's a samurai. So I put my answer here as samurai. I go in here, and there we are, a samurai. So there are my 3 answers to these 3 questions, and they're all correct, so I give myself 3 marks. The next question is asking me to analyse the source. And analysis is to explain something in detail in order to discover more about it. Okay, so which means that my response here will need to be a bit more detailed than my dot pointed responses here, my short responses here. And the question is asking, look carefully at the image, describe who or what is happening in the image. And so I look back up here, and here's a samurai, of course, and let's see what my response is here. Highlight it all. This image depicts a samurai from medieval Japan. He carries various weapons such as, highlight all of it. He carries various weapons such as the samurai sword attached to his belt and the spear he is holding in his hand behind his back, which is here. You can see the top of this, the top of the shaft of the spear there, and then the blade there, and he's holding it behind his back. He is also wearing samurai armor, which at the time was made from leather, and I've put leather here, but also from silk and leather. So the silk's on top and then leather underneath. You can see the silk braid there and there and there. So it's asked me to describe who or what is happening in the image, and I have described who he is, and then I've given examples or features from the image to support my answer. So I'm saying he's a samurai, and it's indicated by the various features such as the sword here and the spear and so forth. So these are all features of the image, and I get 2 marks for that. The final questions, or the final 2 questions, actually there's 3 if we go over the page, are all evaluation questions, and evaluation is a higher level skill than analysing or identification or identifying, okay? Because it's asking not only just to identify key features and give us a little bit more information about them, but then it's asking us to make a judgment about how useful they are in learning more about perhaps a samurai or the time period that we're studying. So evaluation is to judge the significance or value of something. So I have to offer my view or opinion. So question number 5 here, what do you think the artist's motivation was for painting this picture? Well, if I look up here, at the moment I know that this artist, Utagawa Kuniyoshi, he created it between 1798 and 1861. If we had to have a guess, I would say in the early 1800s. He didn't make it when he was just born in 1798, so probably in the early 1800s or something like that. And it depicts a samurai, but I would guess it's probably a samurai from a lot earlier period than when Utagawa Kuniyoshi actually lived, okay? Maybe 100, 200, 300 years before. So I think this is, he's depicting what a samurai used to look like centuries before. And I think it's very accurate. It's very detailed, very accurate. So that's what I think, that's my guess. So that's what I'm going to put down as my answer. So, what do you think the artist's motivation was for painting this picture? The artist's motivation for painting this picture was to show what a samurai looked like and the types of weapons and armour they used during the medieval period. And that's it. If I'm given more information about, the reason why this image was created, then I'll put that in. But I am not given that, so I have to presume or make a bit of a guess. Question number 6. Is this painting reliable? Do you think it is accurate or not? Refer to at least one feature of the painting. So, I think this, just because I've studied Japanese history and I've seen documentaries on medieval Japan, and in those documentaries I've seen samurai who look very similar to this, and I've also been to museums and I've seen sets of samurai armour and samurai swords, katana and samurai spears. So I, from my own research, I know that this is all the objects that he wears and carries, such as a sword, look like the actual historical artifacts that we have examples of. So I would argue this is a very reliable source. So that's what I put down as my answer. And here is my answer here. Yes, this painting is reliable and accurate because it accurately portrays the kind of weapons and armour samurai used during the medieval period in Japan. However, the painting may contain some inaccuracies because the artist portrays a samurai who lived perhaps hundreds of years before he was born. Okay? So I'm sort of sitting on the fence there. I'm saying it's accurate because the way he portrays, the way he draws those weapons and armour are like the ones that we know existed. However, he's basing his picture, his image, upon other, relics. He wasn't there himself. He was not an eyewitness to seeing this samurai in actual real life. He did not live hundreds of years ago, so this would be a secondary source because he was not an eyewitness to when this samurai actually lived. So he's basing it upon other historical records that he would have access to, or artifacts such as I mentioned before, such as suits of armour and so forth. And then the final question asks, is this painting useful for understanding medieval Japan? What does this tell us about the society at the time? Refer to at least two features of the painting. Consider things like social class, the role of the family, technological development, etc. So there's a number of things here in this last part of the question. They're just sort of like they're prompts to give me some idea about the sort of things I can talk about in my response down here. I don't need to refer to all of them, but I do need to refer to at least two features of the painting. So I could talk about the way he looked, the weapons he carried, his shoes, whatever, okay? But I need to use that as evidence to support whatever my viewpoint is going to be. So the first question in this question, and the question asks, is this painting useful for understanding medieval Japan? So I have to say, I have to have a contention and state whether I believe it is useful for understanding medieval Japan, or it's not useful for understanding medieval Japan, or I can say it is partially useful. Now, if I'm going to argue that it is not useful, I don't just write, this painting is not useful for understanding medieval Japan, and then put a full stop, and that's the end of my response. No, that is incorrect. This final question number 7, and this is often the case in these types of, when you're analysing sources, the final question often asks you for an extended response, and I should be writing for this because if I look at the mark here, it's out of 4 marks. Sometimes a question like this will say, well, you need to have a minimum of 100 words. So I need to have an extended response here, and just having a 1-sentence answer that says, no, this painting is not useful for understanding medieval Japan, well, I'm not going to get my full marks. I can argue that the painting is not useful for understanding medieval Japan, but I have to give reasons for that. So if I was going to argue that, I could say it is not useful because the way the sword is depicted is inaccurate, or there were no such things as samurai in medieval Japan, or they didn't wear armour like that, or something like that. I have to have reasons to support my viewpoint, my contention. But because I know this painting is pretty accurate, I'm going to argue that it is useful for understanding medieval Japan. And then that's the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is, what does it tell us about the society at the time? So I've got to respond to both these parts of the questions and then refer to a few features of the painting as evidence to support my contention. So let's see what I have written, and I'll change the colour, and here is my response here. So this first sentence here is my contention, and I use the key terms from the question, and the key terms in the question include painting, useful, understanding medieval Japan. So this is my contention here. This painting is useful for understanding medieval Japan because it shows how samurai looked, the kinds of weapons and armour they used, and the important positions they held in society during this period. And that's that final part of the sentence there. I'm responding to this second part of the question. What does it tell us about the society at the time? It tells us that samurai held important positions in society at that time. So there's my contention. Then here is the evidence and my argument to support that contention that this painting is useful for understanding medieval Japan. The nature of the samurai's weapons and armour in the image indicates that he was highly respected. His sword and armour appear of a high quality and would have cost a lot to make. It took medieval Japanese swordsmiths many months to forge a samurai sword, whereas a set of armour such as the one worn by the samurai in the image required hundreds of metres of expensive silk and numerous plates of leather to construct. So this information here is I've taken from what I've learnt about medieval Japan while I was studying the subject, okay, and I just use it to support my my belief or my argument that the sword and armour in the image is of a high quality, and you can see that here. There's no rust on them. I mean, it looks almost like golden. There's silk here. It's all very very beautiful, of a high quality. If I need to go into further detail, I could look at the samurai's face and the expression on his face, and it's a very strong expression. He looks like a powerful individual. So if he was going to be depicted as not someone who was important and who was perhaps belonged to a lower class in society, or who was poor, then his clothes, his implements, whatever he was holding, would reflect that. Okay, he might be depicted in rags, his facial expression, he might be sad, or it looked cowardly or something like that. But that is not the way this samurai is depicted. He's depicted as very strong, and that he is wearing very highly crafted armour, and a very very well made sword and spear. So we go back down to here, whereas a set of armour such as the one worn by the samurai in the image required hundreds of metres of expensive silk and numerous plates of leather to construct. Only very skilled artisans could make such objects at this time, and only wealthy individuals could wear and carry such objects. So I've spoken about in my response a couple of the features in here. So I've referred to the armour, I've referred to the sword, so that's two features there. I could refer to a lot of other things, and I do decide to refer to one more feature, and that is this cloak, because this actually tells us something very important about this samurai. So this red cloak, this horo, and I did a bit of research to find out just about when these horo were worn by samurai, and it is a significant feature. So we'll go down to my response here. Only very skilled artisans could make such objects at this time, and only wealthy individuals could wear and carry such objects. Another significant feature of the image is the horo or cloak worn by the samurai, as it tells us when he lived. Only samurai who lived during the Heian period, and that period ran from 1794 CE to 1185 CE, or the Kamakura period, so 1185 to 1336 CE, wore horo. Thus the artist must be depicting a samurai from this time. So, once we understand this information, we can see that this artist he lived during this period, 1798 to 1861, and he's drawn a samurai who lived at least, in Japanese medieval society, at least 500 years before he was born, if not earlier. Okay? And then I have a concluding sentence here. These features demonstrate that this painting is a very useful source for understanding medieval Japan. So, just in summary, I have my contention up the top, then I have my evidence to support my contention, my viewpoint, and then I have my final concluding sentence. So, that is how you analyse a source such as this. Hopefully this video has been of use to you and will help you to analyse sources yourself.